The hospital ward stank of blood and disinfectant. Zofia Hoffmann moved between beds with practiced efficiency, checking bandages and administering morphine with hands that never trembled, even as bombs fell somewhere in the distance. Berlin was dying around them, but inside this makeshift hospital, once a grand hotel, her world had narrowed to the wounded who needed her. "Nurse," called a thin voice from the end of the ward. "Nurse, please." She pressed her lips together, ignoring the voice. The man was an American pilot, shot down 3 days ago. Dr. Keller had insisted on treating him, despite protests from the SS officer who occasionally inspected their ward. "Our duty is to heal," he'd said firmly. "The Geneva Convention applies to all." But Zofia kept her distance. Americans had reduced her neighborhood to rubble last month. Her younger brother had been killed in the raid, just 16 years old. Now her mother lived in their half-collapsed apartment, refusing to leave despite Zofia's pleading. "Nurse," the voice called again, weaker this time. Sighing, Zofia approached the American's bed. His chart said Thornton, Matthew J. His dark hair was matted with sweat, his face pale beneath several days of beard. Blue eyes met hers, surprisingly alert despite his fever. "Water," he whispered in English. Zofia understood enough. She poured a small cup and helped him drink. As he sipped, his fingers brushed hers, warm despite his condition. "Dank," he murmured, attempting her language. She stiffened, pulling her hand away. "You're welcome," she replied in carefully practiced English. "Now rest." "Wait," he said, reaching for her sleeve. "Your name?" Zofia hesitated. "Nurse is sufficient." He smiled weakly. "I'm Matt." "I know who you are, Lieutenant Thornton," she replied coldly. "You are the enemy." The smile faded. Just a man, Just a man trying to survive, like everybody else." Zofia turned away, her throat tight. Love and compassion were luxuries she couldn't afford, not anymore. Not when the world was ending around them. Not when Americans like him had killed Hans and thousands of other innocent Germans. Her job was to keep him alive until he could be transferred to a prisoner camp, nothing more. She didn't return to his bed for the rest of her shift. 2 nights later, the sirens wailed. Zofia had been reading a letter from her mother by candlelight in the nurses' quarters when the sound cut through the night. She stuffed the letter into her pocket and ran to the ward. "Everyone to the cellar," Dr. Keller called. "Nurses, help those who can't walk." The hospital staff moved with practiced precision, transferring patients onto stretchers. Zofia headed toward the American's bed, finding him already struggling to stand. "Stay down," she ordered. "You'll tear your stitches." "I can walk," he insisted, wincing as he sat up. The first bombs fell, somewhere too close. The building shuddered. Dust sifted from the ceiling. "There's no time," she said, helping him to his feet. His arm went around her shoulders, warm and heavy. She could feel his heartbeat, rapid but strong, as they stumbled toward the stairs. They had just reached the stairwell when the world exploded. Zofia felt herself lifted and thrown. Pain bloomed across her back as she hit the wall. Then darkness. When she opened her eyes, she was lying under debris, a heavy weight across her legs. Dust filled her lungs. She coughed, trying to orient herself. "Nurse?" "Zofia?" Lieutenant Thornton's voice came from somewhere nearby. "Are you alive?" She was startled he knew her name. Had someone told him? "Yes," she managed between coughs. Rubble shifted, and then his face appeared above her, streaked with blood and dust. "Thank God," he breathed. "Don't move." Part of the ceiling came down. The others, she asked. I don't know. We're cut off from the stairwell. He began carefully removing pieces of plaster and wood from her legs. Are you hurt? I don't think so. Just trapped. She winced as he lifted a larger piece. Your wounds will have to wait, he finished grimly. When her legs were free, he helped her stand. Pain shot through her ankle, and she stumbled against him. Careful, he murmured, steadying her with surprising strength for a wounded man. Lean on me. You're injured, she protested. So are you, he countered, indicating her blooded uniform. We help each other, or we both die here. Zofia realized they were in what remained of the hospital's small library, now cut off from the main ward by fallen debris. A single lantern, somehow still lit, cast long shadows across the destruction. We need to find a way out, she said, limping toward what had been the doorway. Matt shook his head. Not until the raid is over. This section is still standing. Moving around could be dangerous. Another explosion, more distant, emphasized his point. Zofia sank onto a partially crushed settee, suddenly exhausted. Matt lowered himself beside her, grimacing with the effort. Your stitches, she said, noticing the spreading stain on his hospital clothes. Probably torn, he admitted. Without a word, she tore a strip from her petticoat and began rebinding his wound. Her hands moved with professional detachment, though she was acutely aware of his breathing, the warmth of his skin. Thank you, he said when she finished. Then, unexpectedly, I'm sorry about your brother. She froze. How did you talk in your sleep, he said softly. When you dozed in the chair by my bed. You called for hands. Zofia felt tears threatening. He was 16, she whispered. He wanted to be a doctor. Matt's hand covered hers. I'm so sorry. She should have pulled away. Instead, she found herself asking, Do you have family, Lieutenant? Matt, he corrected gently. And yes, parents in Montana, a younger sister. They think I'm dead by now, probably. Montana, she repeated, the American word strange on her tongue. Is it beautiful? Wide open spaces. Mountains and sky for days. His voice softened with memory. Nothing like this hell we're in. The bombs continued falling, but seemed farther away now. In the strange intimacy of their shelter, surrounded by destruction, Zofia found herself telling him about Berlin before the war, the music, the cafes, her nursing school graduation. He spoke of his college years, his flight training, the farm where he grew up. I never wanted to kill anyone, he said at one point, staring at the dust motes dancing in the lantern light. I joined to protect people back home. So did our soldiers, she replied quietly. Their eyes met in the dim light, and something unspoken passed between them. They were enemies only by circumstance, souls caught in the machinery of powers beyond their control. When she finally dozed against his shoulder, exhausted, it felt almost natural. Morning light filtered through cracks in the debris. Rescue workers eventually dug them out, finding them huddled together for warmth. Dr. Keller gave Zofia a strange look as she limped from the rubble, supported by the American lieutenant. The hospital relocated to a school building 3 streets away. Most patients and staff had survived, though the hospital itself was largely destroyed. Lieutenant Thornton was assigned a bed in the corner of the new ward, awaiting transfer to a POW camp. Zofia maintained her professional demeanor during the day, but in the quieter hours, when most patients slept and only a skeleton staff remained, she would sometimes sit by his bed. They spoke in whispers, sharing pieces of themselves. He taught her American slang, she corrected his terrible German pronunciation. "Will you write to my parents?" he asked one night, pressing a carefully folded letter into her hand. "When I'm transferred, I mean. Just to let them know I'm alive." "That would be treason," she replied, but took the letter anyway. "Humanity isn't treason," he said softly. The next evening, helping him change bandages, she found a small book of poetry tucked under his pillow, Rilke, in German. "Where did you get this?" she asked. "Found it in the rubble when they were digging us out," he admitted. "I can't read much of it, but—" He hesitated. "Would you read some to me?" So began their nightly ritual. When the ward was quiet, she would read poems by lantern light, translating as best she could. He watched her lips form the words, learning the cadence if not the meaning. Sometimes she would find small gifts on her rounds, a chocolate square from his Red Cross package, a sketch of the mountains he described, wildflowers gathered from the bombed-out courtyard. She pretended not to notice, but kept each one. In return, she smuggled him real coffee once, and extra bread when she could. Small kindnesses in a world gone mad. "You shouldn't be so kind to me," he told her one evening. "I'm still the enemy." "I'm a nurse," she replied. "I don't have enemies, only patients." But they both knew it was more than professional duty that drew her to his bedside each night. The letter came on a Tuesday. Matt watched Zofia read it, saw her face grow pale. "What is it?" he asked when she approached his bed. "You're being transferred tomorrow," she said, her voice carefully professional. "To a camp near Leipzig." The news shouldn't have been surprising, he'd been expecting it for weeks, but it hit like a physical blow. "I see." She wouldn't meet his eyes. "You should prepare your things." That night, she didn't come to read poetry. Matt lay awake, watching the door, but she never appeared. In the morning, as two guards came to escort him, he saw her across the ward, methodically changing bandages. She didn't look up. "Nurse Hoffmann," he called as they reached the door. Everyone turned, including Zofia. "Thank you," he said simply. For a moment, her professional mask slipped, revealing something raw and painful. Then she nodded once and returned to her work. The guards led him away. A week later, Zofia was sorting through recovered items from the bombed hospital when she found a bundle of papers wedged inside a damaged copy of a medical text. Her name was written on the outer page in Matt's handwriting. Heart pounding, she slipped the bundle into her pocket and waited until her shift ended before retreating to the relative privacy of the nurse's dormitory. Inside were letters, a dozen or more, written on whatever paper he could find. Some were on the backs of medical forms, others on pages torn from books with the margins filled. They were dated over the weeks of his stay, starting just days after their night trap together. May 2nd, 1945. "Zofia, I don't know if I'll ever give you these letters. Perhaps it's madness to write them at all. But in this insanity of war, you are the one thing that makes sense to me. When I was shot down, I prayed for death rather than capture. I'd heard stories about German POW camps. But then I opened my eyes and saw yours, and something told me I might survive this after all. You hate me for what my country has done to yours. I understand that. I would hate me too. But I think of you reading Rilke in the lamplight, and I can almost believe in a world after this one, where people remember how to be human again." Matt tears blurred Zofia's vision as she read letter after letter. Some were philosophical reflections on war and humanity. Others were simple accounts of his day, observations of her movements around the ward, memories of home. The final letter was dated the morning of his transfer. May 25, 1945. "My dearest Zofia, By now you know I'm being transferred. I wanted to say goodbye properly, but perhaps this is better. What could we say that wouldn't be either too much or not enough? I found something else in the rubble the night we were trapped, a photograph of a couple, dancing before the war. They looked so happy, so certain of their future. I've kept it as a talisman of what might be possible after all this ends. I don't know what will happen to me now. But I know this war can't last forever. Nothing does. If you ever find yourself in Montana, or I in Berlin in happier times, look for me. I'll be waiting. With more than I can say. Matt with trembling hands, Zofia reached for her own paper and began to write. The war in Europe ended 2 weeks later. Berlin fell to Soviet forces. Zofia continued her nursing work in the chaotic aftermath, now treating civilians and soldiers of all nationalities. She wrote letters to Matt's address in Montana, but never knew if they reached him. Her mother died that winter, pneumonia, in an apartment with no heat. Zofia buried her beside Hans and continued on alone. In July, she volunteered with the International Red Cross, assisting with the repatriation of prisoners and displaced persons. The work took her to camps across Germany and eventually to Leipzig. She never spoke Matt's name aloud, never asked directly about him. But she studied every list of prisoners, every transfer record she could access. It was in a records office in Leipzig that she found it, a notation that Lieutenant Matthew Thornton had been transferred to a hospital facility near Munich after falling ill with pneumonia. The record was months old. There was no indication of what had happened to him afterward. Zofia used her Red Cross credentials to secure passage to Munich. The hospital there had no record of him, or rather, too many conflicting records in the chaos of Germany's collapse. Many Americans were evacuated in April, an administrator told her. Others were moved to Allied facilities after liberation. We have no way to trace individuals. For 3 days, she searched hospitals and makeshift clinics. On the 4th day, exhausted and heartsick, she sat in a bombed-out church that now served as a registration center for displaced persons. "Excuse me," said a voice behind her. "I'm looking for someone." She turned, her heart stuttering. The man standing there was thinner than she remembered, his face more lined. But those blue eyes were unmistakable. "Matt," she whispered. He stared, disbelieving. "Zofia? My God, Zofia." She stood on shaking legs. "How did you— I've been looking everywhere," he said, moving toward her like a man in a dream. "When Berlin fell, I thought. I didn't know if you had survived." "Your letters," she managed. "I found them. And I received yours, all of them, when I reached the American zone." His hands reached for hers, warm and solid and real. "I couldn't leave Germany without finding you." Around them, the world continued its painful reconstruction. Refugees registered for ration cards. Children played in the rubble. Somewhere, a radio played American jazz. "What happens now?" she asked, suddenly afraid of the answer. Matt's fingers tightened around hers. "I have papers," he said quietly. "For you. If you want them. A visa to America." "America," she repeated, the word both foreign and somehow familiar from all his stories. "Montana," he clarified. "Wide open spaces. Mountains and sky for days." His eyes never left hers. "It won't be easy. There will be people who don't understand. But we've survived worse, haven't we?" Zofia thought of Berlin, the ruins of her past, the ghosts of her family. Then she thought of the photograph Matt had described, people dancing before the war, certain of their future. "Yes," she said finally. "We have survived worse." When he kissed her, there in the broken church surrounded by the displaced and the lost, Zofia felt something she had thought impossible in this new, shattered world: hope. 3 months later, they stood on the deck of a transport ship approaching New York Harbor. Zofia wore a second-hand dress and clutched a small suitcase containing everything she now owned, including a bundle of letters and a dog-eared book of Rilke's poetry. "Are you afraid?" Matt asked, his arms solid around her shoulders. "Yes," she admitted. "But not of the future." The Statue of Liberty appeared through the morning mist, her torch raised against the brightening sky. Other passengers crowded the rails, pointing and exclaiming. Zofia thought of the hospital ward where they'd met, of poetry read by lamplight, of letters hidden in the rubble of a fallen city. She thought of all they had survived and all that still lay ahead. "Look," Matt whispered against her hair. "We're home." And for the first time since the bombs began falling, Zofia believed it might be true.